Hi, and welcome back. So I'm going to use a similar example for operating leverage that I use for financial leverage. So here we're going to assume that we can rent a machine for $10,000 a year, or we can buy that same machine and total ownership costs, so that would be maintenance and cost of the capital that I've invested in it, whether I've borrowed it or whether it's my own capital, either way. The annual ownership costs are 20% less, or $8,000. So it's cheaper for me to own the machine than to rent it, which is usually the case. It's usually less expensive to ownership than to charter it. It's usually less expensive to own a truck than rent or lease it. So here I'm gonna not own it, rent it, and I'm going to pay $10,000 a year. And let's assume that that machine generates $4,000 a year of revenue. $14,000 a year of revenue. So that gives me a $4,000 profit. Okay, so I rent it for 10, I use it, do whatever I do with it, I have lots of expenses and so forth, but my net revenue is 14,000 and I make $4,000. If I own it, my ownership costs are $8,000. The machine generates 14,000, same amount of revenue. The customers don't care whether I own it or whether I rent it. So I generate $14,000 of revenue. So I make $6,000 instead of $4,000. That's a 50% increase in profit by owning the machine instead of renting it. That's pretty significant. Why? Makes sense to own it, I think, right? If you look at those numbers, I can make 50% more by owning the machine rather than renting the machine. Okay, let's look at another scenario. Year two, so year one I made more money. Year two, we have a recession and the machine can only generate $4,000. There's no demand. There's no demand for this machine. There's no demand for my services that this machine provides. So I can only generate 4,000 of revenue. Since the rental's 10 grand and I'd lose money by operating the machine, I cancel the lease and don't rent the machine this year. Therefore, my profit or my loss is zero. Not a good situation, but hey, that's the way it is. There's no demand for whatever it was this machine could do. But if I'm leveraged, I own the machine. My ownership costs continue to be $8,000, whether I'm using the machine or not. And the machine generates only $4,000 of revenue, so I lose $4,000. So as a renter, without the capital investment, with less operating leverage, I have a zero situation. But with leverage, I now have a $4,000 loss. Those two examples are actually, if you look at those examples, that's basically Tidewater's situation. Tidewater had a lot of ship ownership, and they had a lot more ships being built. They also had financial leverage, but the operating leverage was as significant as this financial leverage. We've got these ships and we can't use them. We've got them mothballed, we've got them stacked up somewhere, but they still cost money to own them, and I can't get rid of them. Nobody wants them. So that's where their losses originated from. We couldn't cut our costs because they were fixed. This $8,000 is a fixed cost. This $10,000 is a variable cost. I can change it as demand changes. So that's the difference in operating leverage. So let's talk about that fixed cost, variable cost. What we really want to know when we're looking at financials is what are we earning, what's the contribution margin for every transaction. And the contribution margin is the sales price minus all of the variable costs. And the contribution margin then goes to cover my fixed costs. So contribution margin is a really important concept, and it leads to being able to figure out whether I can break even at some level of volume. So what contribution margin, price minus variable cost, you should know that definition. And that's the amount of money available that from any asset that I'm using or any transaction or service that I'm providing that represents what I can use to pay off the fixed costs associated with that. So break even, companies break even when their contribution margin, when the quantity sold or the volume sold equals fixed costs over contribution margin. So if you divide fixed costs by contribution margin, it'll tell you how many units you have to make. You know what the contribution margin is per unit. It'll tell you how many units you have to make in order to break even. Really important concepts. How many do I have to build? So I've designed this new paperclip holder here, and it cost me 75 cents of variable cost to make it, and I can sell it for $1.25. So therefore I have a 50-cent contribution margin. That 50-cent contribution margin will enable me to, and let's say I have $5,000 of fixed costs involved with this. How many do I have to make and sell in order to pay off my fixed costs? And that's going to be fixed costs $5,000 divided by 50 cents. I'm going to have to sell 10,000 units, 10,000 of these paperclip holders in order to break even. So now I can say, well, can I sell 10,000? And what do I have to do to sell 10,000? And that means I break even, so I probably want to sell more than 10,000. Helps me make decisions. Should I do it or shouldn't I do it? Should I make paperclip holders or shouldn't I make paperclip holders? So break-even analysis is a very important concept. Here's an item that we sell for 50 cents that costs us 40 cents, variable costs of 40 cents, so the gross profit is 10 cents. Fixed costs of $6,000, so I have to sell 60,000 units to break even. And what that looks like in a graph is kind of important. So my sales revenues start at 0 when I haven't sold any, and in this case it's going up 50 cents per sale. So my sales revenue line is the yellow line there. The fixed costs, $6,000, stays the same all the way across. So my costs start at 6,000 and go up 40 cents every time I sell something. So this line has a slightly less slope than the sales revenue line. Where they cross is the break even. If I'm below the break even, I'm going to have a loss. And if I'm above the break even, I'm going to have a profit. And you can see the lines diverging there. So that's what a graph looks like. So this break even point, really important to know for a specific product, for a division, for whatever it is I'm doing. I need to know where the break-even point is, and then look at how I can improve that break-even situation. So we've just talked briefly about leverage, how much financial leverage, how much operating leverage we should have. Those are fundamental decisions that companies have to make, and there is no right answer. They're key to profitability, they're key to viability, but deciding what level of leverage I should have, either operating or financial, is a key strategic management decision. And generally speaking, it does not affect operations. It's not an operational situation, it's a profitability situation and a risk situation. So whether I have a lot of debt or a little debt relative to my equity does not affect how I deliver services, whatever it is that I'm selling or whatever service I'm providing. Whether I own my equipment or whether I outsource or lease or rent my equipment, that doesn't affect operations and the delivery of my product. It does affect my profitability, and I have to make those decisions. So those decisions are made outside of the operational realm, and they're made at the financial or managerial realm, and they are strategic. And understanding and making those decisions is I guess why those financial folks get paid the big bucks. Those are key decisions, and don't confuse your personal finances with corporate finances, because having some leverage is generally good. controlling that leverage based on the industry you're in is really the key determining factor for a well-managed company and a not well-managed company. So that wraps up chapter 9. Please answer the questions after the short questions after this lecture. Thanks a lot.